And that was our final speaker for today. If anybody has any questions for Austin or for Mike, I think there was a Q&A from the last session too. I guess this is our last opportunity for Q&A. So we might have lost some speakers along the way, but for the most part, we've got most people here, so.
Mike, it might be a somewhat selfish question, but you showed the map of Merlin's sort of expansion through the world. Last time I visited Australia, I only worked on introduced species. How far away are we from having like a world planet?
There's 12,000 or 11 some thousand species of bird in the world right now. For photo ID, works for about 7,000 species. For sound ID, it works for slightly over 1,000. So in that sense, we're a long way away. But from it working, Australia is a particular embarrassment for me because I work in Australia and have for many years. And I just was down there in November at the Australasian Ornithological Congress, calling for increased reporting of birds. So the problem is you need about 100, 150 recordings per species to train these models. And for only 27% of the species in Australia, do we have that. So the raw material coming in is very rich in some regions, surprisingly rich in India, for example, but not in other regions. And Australia is a great example of a country where you would expect there to be a lot more. So,
would it be helpful to, even if we're not using it to actually ID birds, if we can, to just like collect the sound information through the Merlin app?
Yeah, so I didn't talk about this, but we do sound recording workshops, planning stuff for Australia in November of this year, working with a lot of the sort of BirdLife Australia. So I just have some staff in Ecuador right now. Same thing. So yeah, getting the raw material is critical. And then having the expertise to annotate, you need local folks who know the local birds to do
that. Do you know, has Merlin type information been expanded to other taxa groups, for instance, called, et cetera, or the feasibility of even doing that?
We're not doing it, but there are some people who are doing that. Yeah, there is a lot of interest in doing it for frogs, in particular, because you don't need nearly as many recordings to train models for frogs that don't have the same kind of repertoire issues. They do have temperature-dependent issues, so there are issues, but it's simpler. There's less geographic variation, less repertoire. So there are efforts that are great. But we have the material. If people want to come to us and say, hey, we need frog reports, we have frog reports.
Good question for Io. So I know you said you kind of like force or jokingly force your students to create these projects. I was just curious, like, what's the reaction from your students? Do they love working with kind of like the natural history stuff, or would they rather be trying to do something bloody and combative style?
That's the thing. I mean, as you can see here, all these ocean creatures do not live in a specific environment. Those are not scientifically accurate. But they want to create more bloody wildlife colonies. They look like creating a shooting game. I don't know why. But it really depends. It depends on the students. Because my students want to work in the game industry. But some students want to work in the research area. So if I can persuade these groups of students, can you create more scientifically accurate? So it's all about motivation. That's a good question. And still like very challenging. If you guys have any, public outreach contents or ideas, I'm again teaching the PR course this fall. So let me know. I'll love to use this free later to make some video.
Yeah, we also had a question online, but we've like already stopped for Ohio. And Elizabeth asks, what is the best way to work with VR or AR designers as museums or biologists? What time should we discuss the project, and how close should the collaboration be?
that really depends on what kind of final goal. For this kind of work, these are just like 5 or 6 behavioral experiences. So that's it's like 3 months work. From the school workplace students or class students. But if the what metropolitan region, that's obviously a really extensive work that requires tons of programmer and designer. So that again really depends on the school.
And just to repeat, if people online didn't hear, it really depends on the scope of the work, and like how much work that you need to do, for that question.
I was wondering if, sorry. I was wondering if there's some hay to be made out of kind of combining the approaches of an augmented reality based interactive with ID, apps. You're out in the field and, I know you've got a lot of lovely pictures and things, but having an AR version of the birds that are cool and you can look around and see, get a sense of scale as well. Because one of the things that I think the digital imaging loses with a lot of that is the idea of size, right? We don't usually have scale bars in all of our images, and it's just a 2-dimensional image of a 3-dimensional thing on a screen. But with augmented reality, you actually do get a physical sense. I saw this frog map in Australia. I couldn't believe how big that thing is. I assumed it was going to be like a sparrow-sized thing. It's enormous. So, that sort of thing I think would help, could potentially help with some of these IDs. You have all of that baked in with photogrammetry and light scan and that. So just a thought.
So I disagree with it. I think that makes a lot of sense. I really feel like we just scratched the surface. What we're doing, we just made a thing that IDs birds on. That's it, right? And it's really taken off. I think it shows that there is an appetite for that, and creatively thinking ways for people to use other tools, maybe combined with Sound ID, maybe totally different, that just draws them into nature one way or another is the ultimate goal.
There is actually app I use. I forgot the name of it. So you take a picture of your plant and it detects the name of the plant and tells you, oh, you should not water them twice a week. So I kill so many plants, so that's why yes.
I did. It's for you, Austin, and maybe for the room on a more not philosophical tilt, but everyone who's worked in collections or archives, I think, has encountered ways that the collections or the material gets used that would have been completely unimaginable to the people who did the collecting or took the measurements or did the work to begin with. And when you talk about why we're doing the work that we're doing, I wonder if there are ways to harness the unknowability of what we're doing to motivate us. I mean, to motivate the work. That's not usually how this goes. Like, it's maybe the opposite of what you're saying. Like, you want to identify very clear things like biodiversity loss or policy making or whatever to motivate your actions. But there's so much that we don't know what the activity will be used for ultimately. I mean, even with Merlin, it's like you see people using it in all kinds of ways that you never would have expected, I think. I don't know, is that something that can turn into motivation perversely?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a great point, and I would suggest that what might be appropriate is framing the motivation like one step up. So there might be a lot of things that are happening that you wouldn't expect by artists and fifth graders, and you have a long list. What that all represents, though, is what could be described as mainstreaming biodiversity. Like that could be your motivation. Your motivation is getting biodiversity in front of people and getting them to value that biodiversity. And that could be, you could be checking that box in a bunch of ways. It doesn't have to be identifying a goal that is I'd like to see it used more in middle school. You know, that seems like a fine kind of thing, but it also doesn't motivate a group bigger than your team, perhaps. And that's really what I think we need. I think we need, as a community, to say, you know, if we got these 3 things done in the next 5 years, like we really advanced the ball when it came to mainstreaming biodiversity and providing actionable data on what to preserve in 30 by 30, and some third thing, you know, that could be motivating a whole community of people who are developing methods for new novel use of digital media and using it. You know, maybe they're not trailblazing, but they are using those protocols and seeking to do so because they're part of this bigger thing.
I was just gonna follow up on that. I mean, I always think of that as kind of future-proofing, right? You're future-proofing the collections. You don't want what you're doing in 2024 to be, you know, useless to most people by 2030, right? So, and I think the other thing to remember is that we're copying things off of real objects. So, you know, I think we also need to, we recognize that the cost here is the effort that we're putting in and the money we're spending on storage and, you know, the expertise the time we're taking away from other projects to create these digital facsimiles. But hopefully the specimens themselves remain and persist. And so, you know, we can prioritize, you know, rescanning things or doubling down on things. You know, one thing that I think about a lot with long-term storage of CT data, and I'm sure that the photogrammetry folks think about this a lot too, is long-term storage of the raw data, right? The radiographs or the original photographs, which are enormously, and you probably don't need to, you know, reuse. And so, but of course, future technology might make it much more impactful, you know, to go back and re-extract all the data out again. You can get much more information out, especially with, you know, machine learning techniques that allow you to keep using neural network machine learning digitally, because I don't understand either of them, I think. But the idea is that, you know, you can go back to the thing, but of course, if it costs, you know, $100 to store that thing for 10 years, and it costs $10 to scan it in 10 years' time, you know, it might be worth, and you have the specimen, it might be worth just jettisoning the data, you know, and doing it again. So, I mean, you know, just something that I guess we try to plan around, you know, to future-proof. And recognizing this isn't the forever, we're not creating the forever solution to this, right?
I don't know if maybe kind of piggybacking or leapfrogging off Ed's idea, but you mentioned something about future-proofing, and then just rescanning if it's viable, so at least for CT scanning, viable if you still have the specimen to rescan. Something that maybe a lot of people don't think about is the lifetime of a specimen. For wet collections, it varies. I know that Jamie talked about earlier about formalin specimens. I've scanned some things that have been preserved in formalin that have demineralized. So the bones that they're after, they were never going to be seen in 10 years' time after they were collected, because the formalin basically ate away the mineralization of the bone. So you have this researcher that's super interested in this developmental juvenile stages that they thought would be maintained over time, that you actually don't have that. So something also to consider is these temporal timelines. For CT, it varies. I'm not familiar with what those would be for photogrammetry and other things, but you know, even the conditions of the rattles and the whistles I talked to you about, they've had them since the 1800s, and there's already some damage just over time. The wood becomes brittle and it cracks. Or for me, the paint, it'll kind of get dirty and darken, even though they are stored at the optimal best settings. You know, there's just stuff that happens over time that you can't track the progress of. So when we're creating these digital replications or these, I guess, archival records of them, or even through sound, you that's just something we have to consider, plus the technology changes. So something that in early CT, looking at early data sets, there's in 10 years' time, the technology changes, but the adaptations to how you like look at how to read that first recording or look at that data doesn't exist anymore. You can just look at UPS drives and UPS-C drives, like the connections and the ports keep changing. But it's just something to consider as well in imaging.
And if I could just piggyback on that, I do think that this changing technology is really critically important, and it's both a blessing and a curse. The blessing part is that technologies to analyze these data will be constantly getting better. That's one of the things I was sort of maybe inarticulately trying to say in my presentation is, we're just playing around with this now. In 10 years, 20 years, there's going to be amazing tools, and having digital representations, digital images of the specimens creates that opportunity. Right? So that's the good part. And just to give an example, the Macaulay Library started in 1929. And at that time, they were testing what was considered cutting edge technology, which is talkie films, right? Sound synchronized with film. So they were saying, can we actually film a bird singing? That's really the cat's meow. We can do that. That's amazing. And now look where we're at, right? It's just come so far since then, but that's where it started. I mean, that was decades before magnetic tape was invented, or before the spectrogram analysis was. So all these new tools come along and allow new things to be done. On the not so good side of things is the digital media formats themselves will constantly change. So and a lot of you already know this, but in the digital media world, talk a lot about data migration. You have to constantly migrate the data to new formats, or else you end up with a file you can't open. So that creates work. So that's a real serious consideration for us as well.
Okay, I am going to stop the webinar. Thank you so much to all of our virtual attendees and all of our speakers. And hopefully we'll be able to share some more with you in the near future. But thank you to everyone who joined today.